Hi, everybody. I would like to personally welcome you to the People Productivity Channel, a place where you can become a better you. This channel is dedicated to actually helping individuals, leaders, teams, departments, and entire companies perform better and use the human element at work to its fullest. Every episode, we want to also share a few techniques with you, practices, behaviors, things you can apply right now to actually improve your success. So I'd like to start by welcoming a fantastic guest today. We have Mr. Graham Allcott on. Graham is from Brighton, in the UK. He's sitting there right now, as a matter of fact. And Graham is the author of two incredible books that I really enjoyed. One is The Productivity Ninja, and the other one is Work Fuel. And we're going to spend a little time talking about these today. And actually, you're going to take away some practices that you could apply in your own personal life, at work, on the job, wherever you want to do it. Because what people produce means everything. So, Graham, maybe you could just share a little bit about yourself with the audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here in sunny Brighton, UK, on the south coast, next to the sea. I grew up as far away from the sea as it's possible to be in England, right in the middle. And my football team's from there, Aston Villa, who are terrible. And the first part of my career was actually nothing to do with productivity. I started my career in the charity sector in England. So I was doing a lot of volunteering, and then through that fell into work around promoting volunteering and recruiting other people into volunteering, which ended up being a paid career for a few years. And it was really the first big job I had was running a charity called Student Volunteering England. So at the age of 25, I think I was 25 or 26, I got this job running this small charity. And through the process of that, and then the process of when I left that role, I went freelance, I realized that I had some real holes in my own productivity. So
So
I'm not someone.
tell us a
Say
little
again?
about that. What did you discover? Because this is really how you became interested in.
Yeah. So what I found was my natural style around work is something along the lines of crazy making, ideas driven strategic flake, right? So I'm not someone who is down in the detail. I'm not someone who's a completer finisher. I find doing things in the logical order often quite difficult. I'm quite spontaneous in the way I think. So
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that actually can be very useful creatively, but can be a real hindrance when it comes to being productive and getting the right things done and all of that sort of
Mhm.
stuff. So I think I really learned that from realizing after I finished that big first job that I had, the chief exec's job. I realized that I wasn't very good at being the completer finisher, and what I'd learned to do was sit at my desk, have ideas, and then put those ideas out in a way that then a whole bunch of other people, so like my operations manager and my team and my PA, would take these things and get all this stuff done.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like what happens in those roles often is it's other people getting the things done, but then because you're the leader, you kind of get the credit for it. And I sort of felt once I went freelance after that, and I realized that I was sat at my desk in my spare bedroom at home having ideas, and I looked around and there was no one I could engage to help me with this stuff. I was on my own. It was at that moment that I really realized I just have a problem with the detail and being a completer finisher. And I guess I missed out. The bit that I missed out in my career was that sort of middle management grind of just having to, have your eye over 100 different things and spin lots of different plates and deliver on a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
So I had to teach myself that really, and that was really where the sort of first seeds of Productivity Ninja really came from, was me teaching me. And then I had the enthusiasm of the new convert, the overzealousness of the new convert kind of thing, of just going around talking to everyone I met saying, hey, I've got this new system and my inbox is at 0 and I've got all the right materials ready for the meeting tomorrow, and all these things that perhaps to me felt quite basic things to have in
Mhm.
place. But just suddenly the buzz and the momentum and the kind of dopamine hits of being organized and having things under control versus having things in chaos as it had been previously were just so remarkable to me and so transformative. And as I started talking to lots of other people about it, I realized that they all needed it too, right? So
Yeah.
I thought I
The
thought I was late
world,
to the party,
the
and actually it
world
turned
needs
out
it
that I was.
more than
uh,
ever,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The world needs it. I mean, people are in a fog. They go around, they have too much to do. So, your experience and that epiphany that led you down this road is going to be very valuable for everybody listening to this.
Yeah, I hope so. And so, yeah, that really started me on this journey of teaching productivity to people and sharing my passion for being a productivity ninja. We launched Think Productive, which is my company in the UK in 2009, and we've since opened offices in North America, also in the Netherlands and Western Europe, and then in Australia as well. I'm talking about being super productive. My phone is ringing, so I'm just going to turn that
There
off.
you go. It
Um,
never
so
ends.
yeah, so we have these 4 different offices around the world. We have taught time management to the Swiss and efficiency to the Germans, and
Wow.
even Microsoft Outlook skills to Bill and Melinda Gates through their foundation. So it's been a journey over the last 10 years of really taking this work to all different cultures and sizes of companies and organizations, and also individuals, and also through the book. So Productivity Ninja sold over 100,000 copies, and so I get these lovely emails from people around the world saying, "Hey, I read your book in China, and I've done this thing, and here's a picture of my inbox," and all this kind of stuff. And
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
that's been my life over
I
the
love it.
last 10 or 11 years.
I love that. Them sending you a picture of the empty inbox at zero.
Yeah,
Something
that's the
very,
irony. Is there's a chapter in the book called Ninja Email, and the irony is people send me the screenshots of their empty inboxes,
yeah.
which fills up mine, right? So
Yeah.
that's the irony of my life. But I really deliberately put my email address in the back of the book, and part of that was about wanting to try and start sort of connections and conversations with people, rather than just be like this one. A book is a passive thing. It's like someone writes it, and then somewhere down the line you're reading it, and you have no connection. And I really wanted to make that connection with the audience. So
Mhm.
I do get lots of emails from people, and I make sure I respond to them all. With usually with trying to give something back as well, rather than just saying thanks. It's like, oh, have you also tried this, or
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this right now, or just something like that. Which I just really enjoy that part of things as well.
Wow. So taking on even more work. It's actually most people have trouble managing their own inbox and are looking to get rid of email. So it's amazing that you not only invited email from all these readers, but you're actually able to do a really good response, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing or naive or stupid, depending
Yeah.
on how you look at it. But yeah, I mean, for me, that's the work, right? Like the work is, yes, there's the paid work, which is going into companies and running
Mhm.
workshops and all that. But the work is spreading the word of Productivity Ninja, and that can be
Mhm.
for free on social media or via an email or via a workshop. It doesn't really matter to me. The point is to get these ideas across and help them spread.
So let me ask you a question, very basic. How do you define productivity?
I think there's two definitions for me. So the one in the book is the very practical definition of basically get what you need to get done with the least possible effort. So I think one of the things about my brain which I didn't realize was I just thought everybody thought in this way, and I didn't realize it was particularly different, is that if I'm in the kitchen and I've got things that need to go into a different room, like my brain is thinking about the most efficient way of moving stuff from here to there. And I have little piles I live at the bottom of my stairs, which is like, next time I go upstairs, don't just walk up the stairs, do something useful with that time, like take something
Yeah.
else up the stairs. So I'm always basically the laziest person in the organization, right? Like, I think Bill Gates had a quote once, which was like, if you want, I think it's Bill Gates, if I want something doing well, I find the laziest person and ask them because they'll find the easiest way. And
Yeah.
yeah, so like my brain is very lazy. So getting things done in the most efficient way possible, just in the easiest way, I think is the sort of, for me, the most practical,
Mhm.
basic definition of productivity and of what I do. The slightly more philosophical definition of productivity, which I've really come to talk much more about more recently, is productivity for me is making space for what matters.
Hmm.
And I think for me that really sums up uh, a lot of the things that I think are really special about focusing on productivity, and also often the things that are missing. When I go into companies, it really feels like people don't have the time and the space to do the quality thinking work that actually will make their jobs easier and their lives easier and then feel less stressed. And, often part of my job is because someone's paid for me to come in, it's like suddenly the imperative is to create that space. And,
Yeah.
and in some ways I'm the excuse to sort of provide them with the platform to do what they need to do.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And I love the philosophical definition because people really aren't getting to some of the most important things in their lives. And, they tend to go around in a fog. I have a white screen behind me, which represents the fog of work and life. And, people are trapped in this. And, our job is to remove that fog and help people and allow them to have a much more fulfilling life. And I love the philosophical definition. And I love the fact that you attacked productivity holistically,
Yeah.
that you actually approached it from the standpoint of actual practices that an individual can implement to become a productivity ninja, and then how to create that energy and that drive that is so important that comes from fueling your body and your health correctly. Maybe we could talk about these for a minute, and then I'd like to get into really some of these practices.
For sure. Yeah.
Productivity ninja. So let's start with this one. This is a really good book. Was this, tell me the order you wrote these in. You wrote this one first because I didn't look at the dates, but.
Yeah, so that was the first book. The one you're holding there is actually a 5-year anniversary revised and updated edition of Productivity Ninja. So it came out originally in 2012.
Yep.
And then we kind of got 5 years down the track into 2017, and we said, let's see what's changed in the world since that was first released. And so I basically spent a lot of 2018 just doing rewrites of that book. So, it's quite funny writing it in 2012. You don't think of that being that long ago, but it was a time where people were not so addicted to their phones as they are now, and social media was not as prevalent as it is now. I think, a lot of the technology and just some of the very nuts and bolts references that were in that book just needed a bit of an update as well. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the fundamental principles are the same. But there's a whole new chapter in there called How to Stop Messing About on Your Phone, because I really started to feel like that was the number one distraction point for people. Whereas actually 5 or 6 years ago, people might have talked about, more social media in the sense of looking at Facebook on your computer rather than your phone actually proactively
Definitely.
buzzing up with 10 notifications of WhatsApp and different things. And
Oh yeah,
so I do think it's become a bigger problem in the last few years.
In 2012, I don't recall ever going out to dinner and seeing a whole family staring down at their phones. That is a more recent phenomenon, but
yeah, I think it is.
killer.
Yeah.
It's a killer. It is addicting, and they know it.
Yeah, and so when I was first asked to do the 5-year anniversary edition, I was initially a little bit skeptical, thinking how much can change in 5 years. But I suppose that just shows you that the world moves fast, right? And
Really is moving.
A lot of things did feel very different 5 years down the track. But for me, the thing around phones is very simple, which is that. So I was reading a thing recently that said it was Garry Kasparov, the chess player.
Sure.
He was talking about how in the 1960s and 70s, all the top minds in Moscow and big Russian cities, the top young minds and emerging intellects, they all wanted to become astronauts and cosmonauts, right? It was like that was seen as being the brightest, best job that you could do was, to sort of advance the Soviet cause by putting people on the moon and helping them to explore space and all this kind of very big stuff, and he was saying, what a shame that if you look at those same brightest and best emerging minds now, they all want to go and work for Google and Apple and Facebook. And basically what is their job there? It's to interrupt you as much as possible and take away as much of your attention as possible.
Yeah.
And, for me, that feels really sad, that fundamentally we're missing a trick as a human species by not putting our brightest minds onto more constructive tasks. But
I think
what it also means is we are really in a battle for our own attention. So if we've got a smartphone with us, if we're someone that uses Google and Apple and Facebook products and these kind of things, we've got to recognize that attention is currency, and their job is to monetize and steal as much of your attention as possible. And it's very, very sophisticated. So my take on that is, you really have to, when it comes to your phone, treat yourself like an absolute child. So I use a blocker. The app that I use particularly is called Quality Time, but there are other ones like Freedom and Off Time. And what I'm doing with that app particularly is at certain times in the day when I know I have my best attention and best energy, I'm blocking out my access to Instagram, Twitter, Google Chrome, like all the stuff that may well distract me.
I didn't even know that app was available or apps like that. That's really,
Yeah, and so
yeah,
Freedom's a really interesting one in that you can put that on your phone and you can also use the same one
very
on your
cool.
laptop as well. So, if you were going to, you're tempted to go and look at Facebook on your phone, but then if you don't have access to it, you can cheat and go and look at it on your laptop. Well, you can teach Freedom to block it in both places.
Hmm.
And I used to do a primitive version of this a few years ago when I was writing one of my other books. The primitive version was I had like a time switch that I put on my Wi-Fi router at home on the
Okay.
router.
Hmm.
And so for certain times of the day, we just click the Wi-Fi off. And it just meant that I had no internet
No
access,
internet
no
access.
email,
Yeah.
there's nothing coming through. And so just like cutting it off at source. So that was like the primitive version a few years ago that I was doing. But, more recently, you can do this through apps. It will block certain things at certain times. And, really, it's not about time management anymore. It's about attention management. So how we see the top 2 to 3 hours in our day where we feel most switched on, most able to do our best work, how we manage ourselves in those times and sort of create the spaces in those times, back to that whole thing of making space for what matters, to really do the most difficult or the most powerful work in those times. For me, that's the game. And, managing how you use your phone and the kind of the interaction with your phone, that kind of phone hygiene is, for me, it's one of the most critical elements these days. There's a whole chapter in the new version of the book,
Mhm.
which is basically that, how to stop messing about on your phone.
So let's talk about work fuel because obviously being able to, manage and apply all these practices is great, but you've just got to feel good to have the energy and drive to do it. So I loved work fuel. I've always been into health. I've been working out since I was 15. This is so underappreciated. Companies have all this equipment. They're paying an incredible amount of money for it, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is just operating in a very suboptimal way. If you ran a data center, it'd be a bunch of servers operating at 50% of their
Yeah.
capability. And that's really what's happening. This is a big piece of it. So, what got you interested in this so much?
Well, just as you were saying that, I was just thinking, the biggest resource that companies have, obviously, is all those brains walking around the room, right? And so
Yeah,
those brains operating at a suboptimal level, for me, is just criminal, right? Like
me
it just
too.
feels like such a waste of everyone's
Oh,
time and effort. What got me into it was I started to notice that I had slumps in the afternoon. So 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was really starting to feel like, okay, I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid here. Like I'm following all the productivity ninja, guidance, and I'm doing all the stuff that I teach. But yet, I just feel like there are these hours in the day where I just feel incapable
yeah.
of doing work. And then I had a period that just got worse than that. So I had just a period of just sort of depression as a kind of mental health stage for a little while,
Hmm.
3, 4, 5 months, something like that. And coming out of the back of that, I'd met Colette Hennigan, who is
Yeah.
the co-author of this book, Work Fuel. And I'd already met her, and I was talking to her about this kind of these kind of two problems of, hey, I'm slumping in the afternoons. I've also had this depression thing. What do I need to do differently? And my initial ask to her was to say to her, can you, because she also, she sells products and stuff as well. So I was like, can I buy some vitamins from you that will really just sort me out? And she said, dude, you're just asking the wrong question. The question you need to be asking is, am I eating the right stuff? And am I fueling my brain in the right way? So we got talking and it turned into a coaching thing. So she coached me for 3, 4 months. And the way that coaching worked was I would send a photo of everything that I was eating or drinking
Hmm.
to her on WhatsApp. And we just had like a little kind of 2-person chat going on. And she would send back, either high fives, that's a great meal, Graham, or she'd send back, that's fine, but here's how you upgrade that meal. And here's how you make small changes that make a big difference. And it just turned out that there were a lot of those opportunities. So small things that you can change or just add just to upgrade a pretty normal meal into being something that has just a lot more, brain fuel and really rich nutrition that will really help you to have better energy. Honestly, I can say that since I started to do this, to sort of eat in that particular way and really kind of take that stuff more seriously, I don't get 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock slumps in the afternoon. Like, it's just gone.
Yeah, isn't
So
that?
that's the really remarkable thing, is when you eat well, you really notice it as just like, wow, like my energy level is so much better.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
find, when I eat right and I work out regularly, wow, I am just so much more energetic, clear-headed, able to focus and do things. I love how you had this epiphany, and because you're so focused on, being as effective as possible, noticing that you're having these slumps, and then actually doing something about it. Because a lot
yeah,
of
and then and then do you know, with the book, it sort of came about because the next phase for me was, once I'd been working with Colette for 2, 3, 4 months, something like that, and I really started to see the changes. My next thing was to say to Colette, come into the offices of Think Productive, into my company, and teach the rest of the staff team. Like, I kind of felt this privilege of like, okay, because I'm the budget holder here, I get to have this amazing nutrition experience and transformation. And then, I feel like because I'm the budget holder, I've given it to me, but I've not shared that. So I shared it, and it really felt like that went really well, and people started to really get it. And I just thought, wow, there's something here just about bridging that gap. I mean, obviously there are loads of books about nutrition, there are loads of books about productivity, but it felt like there was nothing in the middle of that space of,
Mhm.
how can we really look at the nutrition side of this and how it relates to productivity, and also look at the kind of human psychology aspect of this. Because of course, for a lot of people, most people watching this will basically know what's good nutrition and what's bad nutrition, and there's often a gap between the knowledge and the putting that into practice. And that was the same for me
Sure.
too. I mean, I kind of knew what was good. I just felt like I didn't have the time to do it, or I didn't have the right stuff in the fridge, or all these kind of things that
Mhm.
are actually just about you and your own sort of human weirdness and human narratives, rather than actually being about practical barriers to doing it. And so if you remove those barriers, you can really start to just create that change.
Yeah. So, what do you think it is about us humans that in general makes us unproductive unless we start to grasp, implement practices, put changes in? What is it about our nature that we even have to do this?
So, I mean, I've been doing this podcast for a few years called Beyond Busy, where I interview, usually very high performing people in a variety of different fields. So from Olympic gold medalists through to top comedians and
Mhm.
CEOs and all kinds of different people. And often the question that comes back, when I'm doing keynotes, people say, with all the people you've interviewed, what have you really learned about human psychology and human behavior? And my answer is pretty glib, but I stand by it, which is the only single thing I've learned in 100 hours of interviewing high performance is humans are weird, right? So let's start there. And so I think when it comes to productivity, I think there's a few very classic bits of weirdness there. One is, I think there's a kind of lazy element to the human brain. So we kind of know roughly what we need to do, but
Yeah.
we're lazy in defining that more specifically. So, a lot of my work really is about the language that we use with ourselves. If you've got a to-do list in front of you right now as you're watching this, look down that to-do list and look how many of the things on your to-do list are actually things that you can do versus ideas or just a nagging thought or just a general kind of sense of there might be
Mhm.
something I need to do here. And actually, a lot of the things that end up on people's to-do lists are kind of ideas or projects rather than actually things they can get done. So a lot of my work is kind of taking that language that people use of themselves and just really getting people to be more specific about that stuff, quantifying projects,
Mhm.
thinking about the next physical actions that you can take on stuff. So picturing yourself in the room, when I'm getting momentum on this, when I'm going to solve this thing, what does it look like? What am I doing? Am I on a call? Am I sitting down with a pen and paper and mind mapping stuff out? Am I researching on Google? Like, once you can start to see what that thing is, it's so powerful because, when your brain gets to it next time, it's so much clearer, it's so much
Yeah.
easier to pick that up and say, right, I know how to do that. Whereas if you see something on your list, like, oh, sort out the appraisals or whatever, it's just like, oh, it just automatically has a kind of negative ring to it. So, just the kind of laziness around that. The whole kind of lizard brain thing, I think, is a huge cause of procrastination. So this kind of part of the brain that produces fight or flight, gives us fear,
Hmm.
gives us guilt and regret and nerves and all these things that are just very difficult human emotions. And so, for me, helping people to kind of get beyond some of that kind of yuckiness
Yep.
and sort of defeat that procrastination by creating momentum comes in a whole number of different ways. One of my favorite ones is when you put a deadline in someone else's world, right? So if you're stuck with something, go to your boss and say, right, I'm going to have a meeting with you next Tuesday to discuss the reports that I will have written by then, and then
Yeah.
suddenly your lizard brain has a bigger fear, which is, I don't want to look stupid on Tuesday, so I better write the thing now. And
I think
so,
that's a great practice because
yeah,
people hate losing face, and I think that's fabulous. And I like the way you segued automatically into the productivity ninja piece of the talk, because we do want to give the audience some really good, helpful tips. So let's continue on this path really till
sure,
the, to the end of the interview.
let's do that.
So, yeah, creating obligations for yourself with others. I love that. I think that's just very powerful because that works for me too. And it works, specifically when I'm obliged, a boss gives me something to do. I don't want to let them down and I do it. And reversing that is brilliant.
Yeah, I have the same thing with, so one of the practices in Productivity Ninja is an idea that I really learned from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, which is the whole idea of the weekly review.
Hmm.
And this is a thing that if you've read Getting Things Done or you've read my book, you'll probably be aware that it's such a fundamental practice. And once you start doing it, everything else kind of falls into place. And it's also the hardest thing, certainly the hardest thing in my book, and I'm pretty sure it's the hardest thing in Getting Things Done, to kind of make stick, right? Like it just doesn't work for people often. And so I hope that what I did with Productivity Ninja is kind of make it much easier to sort of adopt as a practice. But it's one of those things that once you start to see the benefit and the power of it, then you can start to like really make that change. But
Yep.
it's one of those things that people don't often give it the sort of the time and space, in the beginning. So I think, yeah, for me, that's a really important aspect, is kind of like, again, recognizing that sort of gap between what we know is good for us and where we're actually at. And sometimes there is that
Yep.
sort of
So
sticking.
share how you make the weekly review stick. How do
Yeah,
you
so what I was going to
get
say with
into a
that is,
good habit?
I often find one of the really nice solutions to that is, isn't it interesting how we're always more willing to let ourselves down than let other people down? So we are just talking
Mhm.
about that a moment ago with, we don't want to lose face. And so with the weekly review, just the idea of finding someone else who also has that goal of trying to do it regularly and becoming weekly review buddies. So sitting in a room with that other person and you're both in silence, you're both working on your own stuff, you're not really collaborating, but you're showing up for each other so that you can show up for yourselves.
Mhm.
I found that as a really powerful thing. When I've come out of workshops and set that up, and I've had people say, "Hey, we're 3 years down the line and we're weekly review buddies, and we do it every week." And for me, that's one of those just really interesting pieces of psychology that I've learned through doing that. Is if you give someone the accountability and the kind of eyeballs of someone else,
Yeah.
then they're much more likely to hold themselves, to the right kind of level of account too.
It's really funny how we both ended up in the business of the psychology of productivity, coming at it from slightly
Mm.
different angles, right?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
the organizational group productivity, and you're the productivity ninja. I just love the marriage of these two. I think it's amazing.
Yeah,
Really.
and I had the same kind of feeling when we first kind of met online. It felt like, oh,
Mm.
like you're doing this bit and I'm doing this bit, and there's such a nice linkage between the two for sure.
Yeah, such a really incredible linkage. Let's talk about other practices. Mindfulness is one that, you mentioned in your book. I think it's more popular. Share a little bit about, how you approach it.
Yeah, well, the story of that was quite interesting. So there's 9 characteristics of the productivity ninja in the book, and mindfulness is one of those 9. When I went away to write the book, for a long time I wasn't writing, and I realized that again it was a case of I needed to make space for what mattered. And I was in a space and in a place in Brighton in the UK where there was this business that needed me all the time, and it was very
Yeah.
difficult to really make that space. So I ended up flying to Sri Lanka and writing the book in Sri Lanka. And there was going to be, when I got on the plane, there was going to be 8 characteristics of the productivity ninja, and mindfulness was not one of them. And then the first person I met, and really the only person I spent time with, because it was a very solitary, deliberately solitary experience. I found this little beach hut that had no Wi-Fi and was very cut off, and
Uh,
I was very much on my own.
you had more
But the
fun
one guy
writing
that
your book than I did, I got to tell you.
say again.
You had more fun writing your book than I did. I was sitting on New Jersey Transit, and you're at a beach. I mean,
Right, yeah. But yeah, so I was there for basically a month, and the only person I really spent time with was a Buddhist monk who I met at the bus stop. So just outside the place I was staying, there's a little kind of road that went on to the next town, and I met this Buddhist monk there, and we waited for the bus, and we got chatting, and he ended up just saying, "Hey, if you want to come to the monastery, it's like 4 miles away. Come and learn meditation." So I did. I started going, and the other thing that was really surprising about the process of writing a book is I didn't realize that when you try and write the first draft of a book in a month, it's as much a physical problem as it is a mental one. So like I had bad backache and
oh,
was kind of really struggling with the physical stress that it was putting on my body of just typing for hours at a time. So I started going and practicing meditation, and it really helped with those physical symptoms, but also I really noticed how much more mental focus it gave me when I came back to start the writing again. And just over the process of that month, it really dawned on me, this is actually a big part of productivity. And to be honest, in 2012, meditation was much less of a thing.
yeah.
And I was really nervous about putting it in the book because I felt as if I was going to take this book to my corporate clients. They were going to see it as being too hippie and too woo-woo. And it was going to actually be risky or costly for my business to sort of introduce this book to my existing clients.
Yeah.
And what's funny now is a few years later, and again, we talked about this at the start, just how much things change in a small period without you even noticing. Now it feels like when the slide comes up saying mindfulness, people go, "Oh, not again."
Right.
And it's like almost like this, it's seen in some
It's a
articles
static
and
thing
some,
almost.
yeah, and I think it's seen in some articles and some kind of parts of the business world as like, oh, mindfulness suddenly is like the catch-all, one-size-fits-all solution to every problem, and I don't think it's that either.
Me either.
For
Yeah.
me, I found a real power in doing it. I did a month a couple of years ago. I did these extreme productivity experiments, and one of them was the first 10 minutes of every hour of work I would spend meditating, and just to see what that was like.
So what
And
happened?
what happened was I would do the 10 minutes of meditation, and I would come back to the work and just have this just humongous level of focus around it, and also have the same kind of effect as, when you're just deep into something and then you get up to just go and make a coffee or whatever, and just that sort of practice of just getting away from the desk and coming back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, it would just freshen me up the whole time. And so I really, so I wouldn't say I stick to that of like 10 minutes every hour, but it's definitely
Mhm.
something that, it's part of my week. I don't have a particularly rigid schedule. For example, I don't do it every morning at exactly the same time and that kind of thing, but it's definitely a thing that, if I've got in from a difficult day, I'll try and just kind of sit for 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm.
I have a kind of regular yoga practice as well. And I just think it's important. I think it's soft. I look at it often as like the kind of defragging the hard drive,
Mhm.
but for the brain,
That's a
right? So
good
it's
way
like
to look
kind of
at it. I
mental
think
release.
that's what
Turn
it
it
is.
off and turn it on again, and you'll feel better.
Yeah, yeah. We probably have another 5 minutes. Maybe we could spend the last 5 minutes talking about interruptions. It's a plague. And, there are two forms of interruptions. There are the external interruptions, constantly happening, whether it's your phone, a colleague coming over, interrupting you at work, or internal interruptions where you interrupt yourself.
For sure.
And, what practices do you have for these external interruptions? What do you do? What do you recommend people do?
Well, I mean, there's two things, isn't there? So the first is try and eliminate as many of them as possible. So one of the ninja characteristics is stealth and camouflage, tactical hiding. Um,
Yeah, I love that.
I really feel like there's a problem around how people view thinking in business. So, for example, no one feels guilty about coming away from their desk to sit in a room with three other people and think about a thing because they call that a meeting, right?
Yeah.
Whereas to take an hour away from your desk to do quality thinking on your own, people say, "Oh, I could never do that. I don't have time for that." And so I think finding times to be able to do that and be able to get away, so that you're eliminating some of those interruptions, and people can't find you all the time. Making yourself deliberately less available, I think, is a really good productivity tactic in general. Then what I'd say is there are always going to be other interruptions that you can't avoid, and you will be interrupted. And there's all the stats that find that a 1-minute email interruption takes you 15 minutes to get back onto the thing you're doing, and interruptions are so costly. One of the things that I really like, just as a practice, is for the key people, so your line managers, your close colleagues, that kind of stuff, is keep a kind of section on your to-do list where all the conversations that you need to have with that person are on there. And what that means is when that person inevitably calls you or comes to your desk or interrupts you, you can actually turn that interruption into something valuable, because it's like, here's the 3 things I've got for you while we're in the middle of the conversation. So I really like that as a tactic, see those interruptions not always as something bad, but also as, it's part of the flow of everyday life, but I can do something good with it too.
Yeah. Gee, I can't afford to interrupt Graham because he gives me far too much to do. It's a great practice. How about internal interruptions, where people are constantly just unfocused, preoccupied?
So the biggest thing that distracts our human brains is ourselves. And in particular, all of those kind of thoughts or nags or ideas and anxieties and all these different things that just pop into our brain, usually at the time when we really need to get the most important work done. So one of the key habits that I talk about in the book is capturing and collecting information, and seeing that as something, very specific and a habit within itself. Often it's kind of viewed as like, okay, so I'm writing my to-do list, and while I'm doing that, I'm kind of capturing all that stuff from my brain, but I'm also trying to organize it together, and I'm trying to review and prioritize and make sense of, and all that kind of stuff. So getting into the habit of just capturing for its own sake, and really not discriminating between good and bad ideas, just capture them all anyway, and get them all out of your head. So I'm a big fan of these. So I have these little notelets on the desk in front of me all the time. I have a whole stack of them. And when I'm on a call, or I'm in the middle of writing or whatever it might be, if I just have a random idea, I just scribble it down, I chuck it into my in tray, and then I'll come back and look at those over the next couple of days. But it just allows me to, in half a second, write that down and be back on the thing that I'm doing. And it's much easier to do that than suddenly go down the kind of YouTube rabbit warren, or the Google one thing after another kind of rabbit warren, and all those things that, before you know it, you've lost half an hour or an hour of your time. So for me, like, being able to just capture that stuff, when I'm walking along, it's straight into my phone. There's a really nice little app called Captio, which I use for that, which just capture it really quickly. It will then email the idea to you, or it'll put it into your to-do list app if you want to use it that way too. But just finding ways to, wherever you are, be able to capture those ideas really quickly, so that you can get back onto the thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I love it.
And even if the thing you're capturing is, I'm worried about this person in my life, or this project, I'm really worried that it's not on track, or whatever, just capture that, and then you don't need to spend 20 minutes worrying about that project or that person. You can kind of come back to that when you're less focused, or you have more time, or whatever. But just, sometimes just capturing those things that we're thinking about and feeling and all of that will just help you to stay focused as well.
Yeah. In this in this digital era we're in, where things are moving so fast and companies want to be agile, they want to be resilient, they're looking to move faster and do things. What you do is so important, because ultimately these are human characteristics. They're not characteristics of work. They're human characteristics. And they come from, changing the way work and people operate. So I know you've got to run. And I did just want to say, look, thank you for coming on. If you have a parting thought for anybody on becoming their productivity ninja, I just highly recommend that everybody watching this, please get these books, figure out which one you need most, start with that, and then get the other. Because this matters in this day and age. This is the difference between success and failure for individuals and companies. And the world wants you disorganized. The world wants you distracted. I think people have to actually take control, and they've got to do what you did, have that epiphany, and really start to change the way they operate, so that they can free up time to work on what's meaningful in their lives.
Yeah, and I suppose my parting thought is to say that a lot of the stuff that's in the book, it's common sense.
Hmm.
It's also not commonly applied. So again, it comes back to that gap between what we know we should do and what we're actually doing. And often there's a gap between those two things. So a lot of these things are very easy to implement once you start, and the trick is starting. Henry Ford has a lovely quote, which is, "Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason so few engage in it." And I really do feel that a lot of this comes down to doing quality thinking, being really rigorous in your thinking, and ultimately using that thinking to make space for what matters.
Yeah. And I think making space for what matters is what it's all about. So listen, I thank you very much for coming on. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week. And I look forward to having you back on to talk about work fuel and
Thank
really
you.
getting people fueled up, energized, and ready to take over and win their own personal games. Thank you
Frank,
so much.
it's been a pleasure. I'm about to go off and do the school run, go and pick up my little boy from school.
Excellent.
And yeah, look forward to doing it again soon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Take care.